All right, we're COMP2068, it's week 10, lesson 10, part 1. And what we're talking about today is finite state machine. I'm going to go right into Visual Studio here to start our work, right? And I'm going to kind of continue from the stuff that we worked on from last time, which was our COMP2068 mail pilot example. I'm just going to bring it up here in a second. I apologize again for being slightly under the weather. I'm a little better than last week. It's lasted about a week so far. It is what it is. I'll just keep going. I have a mail pilot build 2, and I have a mail pilot build 1. And I'm not sure which one I'm going to go with yet. There's also a mail pilot demo that we worked on. I think this is the one. Let's try this one. Yes, this is the one we did last time. Hey, welcome. I was doing this. This is my, I call this my mad scientist kind of stuff that I did last week. I've done a couple things to Visual Studio for you guys just for today. If you notice, I've just parked some of these windows here to give us a little bit more room to look at this stuff because I need more room. So I added in the cloud, island, and plane, engine, ocean. All that stuff is from a sounds and everything else perspective works. So if I run this thing, right, this is where we are right now, right? So a very, very simple thing. We want to add some scoring to the game, so we need to add that in. And we also have to cover finite state machine, and like I said, I'd like to try and cover some other piece parts to it as well. Okay, so how do we do that? What's our first steps? Well, I know that I want to make, if in order for me to do some scoring, right, I'm going to start scoring, I need to have a container, some kind of container to hold my score, right? I need that. When I think container in my head, the first thing I think about is a class, right? So I'm going to probably put together a class. Now before we get there, there's a couple of modifications you have to make to our current game. One is, if you look at the game itself, it runs right now, the way it is, I'm just going to make this a little bit larger for us to see, right? It runs right now kind of on its own, and if you notice it says, I've got this cloud loop where I add the clouds to the game, I add my island, I'm adding everything, and I'm adding everything to the stage. Well, this is all great and good if I want to add things directly to the stage. The bad thing about adding things directly to the stage is that if I want to clean everything up from one state to the next, it's hard for me to clean everything up from the stage. So it becomes challenging for me to do so. So the way I do it is like I showed you before, and actually if you look at the examples online, is I create a game container that I throw into everything inside of, right? And again, think about a CreateJS container as a way of compartmentalizing your work. And then if you do anything to the container, it doesn't kill the main game. Main game's still going, right? Then you just deal with the container object itself. You can do whatever you want, wipe all the objects, and you do some cleanup there manually. Because again, you don't want to have a memory leak, and the best way to protect yourself is some kind of container object, I find. Now there's many other approaches to this, but this is the approach that I'm going to take today. So the first thing is, I got to think about this as an object. I'm going to put this up here. This is kind of, I should have kind of documented this as almost like game variables that are kind of going to be global that I'm going to have for now. I've got a canvas, a stage, an asset loader, all this kind of stuff. That's not going to go away. I'm going to kind of include here a new game object. I'm going to call lowercase game. It's going to be of type createjs.container, right? That's the first thing I'm going to add in. So I'm making a reference. Whenever I do this kind of stuff, remember I haven't actually instantiated an object here. I'm creating a reference to the container class for CreateJS. So that's the first piece. The second piece is I need to instantiate this thing. And it's got to be done right here inside of our main game area. And it's got to be instantiated just before Ocean is added to the stage. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of go down here, and I'm going to say something like, instantiate game container. Right? So I'm going to go game is equal to new createjs.container. Hey, there's brown sugar. Okay, so this container class is going to hold everything else, right? I'm going to do a game container as opposed to directly adding things onto the stage, right? So if I do that now, I can do this. I can say, well, here's my game. I'm going to say, instead of stage.addChildOcean, I'm going to go game.addStyleOcean. Same thing with this one, island, plane, and even my clouds.
Can I still do stage though if I want to?
Wait. And then at the end, I'm going to go stage.addChildGame. So all I've done here is I've put everything inside, I've poured everything inside of my game container. And my game container is going to be the main container that everything is added onto. Why? Again, it's more portable. I can add stuff to it. I can delete it. I can, and it's more manipulatable than if I just directly add it to stage. Because that means every object on the stage I gotta handle individually. I don't want to do that, right? So this kind of is in my opinion, a little workaround that I use. Okay, first of all, when we made this change, and I recommend this to all of you. We do game development or any kind of app development in piece parts, right? We want to move slowly. So I made a change. I want to check that it works, okay? Because I can always go back. Let's play this game and see if it works now. Using the game, because if there's any errors, we can fix it. So and also, even though it looks like it works, I want to refresh the screen every time. And sometimes you don't see a change until we refresh the screen. So far, looks like my game container took, right? And we're good to go. Okay, so that's a good thing. This is the first piece that I want to make. The first change I want to make to our game is this game container. Just for the sake of keeping everyone up to track, I'm going to go to Changes, and I'm going to say something like added game container to our main repository, which is online, and it should be named the same thing, COMP2068.mailpilot demo, something like that. It should be online if you actually go there. And this is where I'm keeping all this stuff. Commit, I'm going to go home, I'm going to go unsync commits, and I'm going to go sync. That's just the first piece. Second piece I'm going to add in is a scoreboard, right? Now, here's the trick. I know I need buttons. I know I need labels, right? And I know my button is, you know what? It's a pain in the ass for me to make a button with a kind of a hover effect and all that stuff we did. We've already kind of gone over that before, right? I've kind of created a hover button and all that stuff before. Now, where the hell did we do that thing? We did the hover button thing, right? We made a hover button class. We did it in Slot Machine, right? So we know we have that project available to us. And if I go up online here, let's just go up online. Why would I reinvent the wheel when I have a working button, right? That's my point. So I'm going to go into, I'm going to go kind of on GitHub. I'm going to go into my repositories here. This is a great reutilization of stuff too. And I'm going to kind of type in slot machine, right? So I can see that I have a slot machine demo that's up here already. And inside my slot machine demo, in my scripts folder, I have objects. And look, I have a button class already waiting for me. Why would I make it again, huh? So I'm going to take this button class. I'm going to go in there, and right as I stand, this looks pretty darn good to me, right? This button class, the way it is. It has a mouse over. It has a button image, which happens to be a bitmap. I pass in X and Y coordinates and a string. All this looks good to me, and I'm going to take this entire thing, right, up until I go to my module objects, and I'm going to go back to my Solution Explorer here. I'm going to go to Objects, right-click. I'm going to go Add, and I'm going to add a new TypeScript file. And I'm going to call this thing Button, right? And then as I do that, I'm going to drag and drop or copy and paste my button stuff in here, and I got my button class, right? Now the good thing about this, I'm going to need a button later. I know that. I know that for a fact that's going to happen, right? So here's my mouse over event. I don't have a click event because my click events are all going to be unique. I'm also using public getter and setter objects if I need to, and I've got my event handlers right here to handle, button events. All right, so this is kind of cool, and it's of course of type. My button itself is of type create.js bitmap. My button image. Now, one thing I don't like about this button image is because I have an image object, right? I need to modify this thing, so we've learned things ever since then about buttons. I want to extend my button class a little bit, so I'm going to go and extends create.js.bitmap because I want to make it a button. I don't want to make it so that my button class has an image, button image. I want to kind of add that in, right? So in order for me to do that, I need to send something to the superclass, and of course, what am I going to send there? It's got to be a path to the string, right? Because if you notice my bitmap over here, this is what it would be like if I was going to create a new bitmap, and it listens for a path, a string path, right? So that's what I'm going to be taking in. So I got to send that to the superclass. I'm going to go super in here, and I'm going to send something called, let's rename this thing called string path in there. That's what I'm going to send in there. And of course, I'm going to just rename this path to string path just to make it more, makes more sense, because that's what it is, string path. So it's going to go in there, and I also get my X and Y coordinates for the button. Well, that's cool, but that means I don't need this anymore. I don't need a button image because it is an image. That's what my button is now. My button is a bitmap. Now it says some other stuff here. It says identifier expected. We're going to fix that in a second. I'm just going to get rid of all this crap. So my button image is equal to new bitmap path. I don't need to do that anymore. I do need to set up my X and Y coordinates, but that's just going to be this X and this Y. So let me just get rid of all this and all this. See if I can fix this error here really quickly. So I know I'm going to need a button. I need this, and I'm going to say, instead of this image, I'm going to say, of course, this dot add event listener, because I'm adding it on to the actual object itself, which is this image right here, right? This get image property also, I don't need anymore because my button is an image, so I can get rid of this, right? I don't need that image property at all. So again, my I need a name for my button. It's going to be called button. It extends create.js bitmap. That's what I have to put in there, right? So I've got my two X and Y coordinates I've got private variables. I've got public accessor methods if I want to change my coordinates. Yeah, this is cool and everything else, and I like it from a neato kind of way to work it out. But you know what? To me, it is a button. It is an image. So I'm going to wipe all this stuff out as well, right, for now. And again, these are some changes I'm going to make to this button class to streamline it a little bit. And I'm going to make these from private to public, right, because I have something to work with. Here's my public. And of course, in order for me to do that, I'm going to have to wipe away these X's and Y's because they are, well, I already have X's and Y's. I don't have to declare X's and Y's anymore because X's and Y's are part of the bitmap, right? So I can get rid of this. And same thing with this. And same thing with this. I can kind of change this up. So if you notice, I've slimlined, I've trimmed up my button quite a bit now. Yeah? So that's what my button looks like now. Right now, it's because why? Because I'm extending a bitmap. My button is a bitmap, as opposed to me making my button its own class and its own image, holding its own image and all that stuff. That means I can add button to the stage or my game, and it's gonna hold an image inside the superclass, which is the bitmap object. Okay, cool. This is done. This is part one. Whenever you add a module, you got to do the first thing, which is add it into your Solution Explorer like this in buttons. But the next step is I got to drag and drop this button into my index.html file, right? Because here's my index.html file. It has to know, my file needs to know about the button class, right? And my button class is obviously going to come after ocean and plane and island because I don't really care about those. So let's just go to my Solution Explorer, and I'm going to drag and drop my button class now back inside there. It's another game object that I'm using. It's an object called button. And also in my game, my main game object up here, I'm going to probably have to add my button in here. Else I'm not going to know. I can't access my button or reference my button objects unless I put it in here. All right, so there's my button is done. To test it out to make sure that it's working properly, if I wanted to make a button object, I would just go here and I should be able to reference it now. Var button lowercase, as an example, is of type objects dot button, and you see I can do that. Right? I can start referencing my button object because it exists. So I know that it's linked into my system. Okay, cool. I also need some constants because you know what? I know I'm going to access some fonts because I'm going to create my kind of images or some fonts that go up on the screen that show off my score. They're going to say welcome to, okay, here's MailPilot and game over. I'm going to have to do these things over and over again. And I don't want to type in the font every single time. Like 40 pixel consolas with a color of yellow. I don't want to do that all the time. I want to kind of get that, which harkens to me about another class, another container class, which I'm going to use. But really, instead of making a container, I'm going to use it almost like a module. It's going to be a module add-on. I'm not going to make a class, and all I'm going to do is create a constants module that I can access later. All right, so let's take a look at that. So a little bit different. Instead of it being an object, it's not really an object for me. So I'm going to put it in the main scripts folder next to my game. Right, so I'm going to go right click on scripts. I'm going to go add, and I'm going to go TypeScript file. And from here, I'm going to call this thing constants. Right, and inside this thing, this file itself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, so module, right, constants, right, that's what it's called, and I'll put some curly braces in there. And inside my constants module, I'm going to start exporting some of these constants. And one of them, of course, is going to be called maybe my font, kind of my font itself. So what kind of font am I using? And now I can break it down. Like, for example, I can say something like my font size, all in caps, right? And of course, I've got to specify what kind of object this is. Is it a string? Is it a number? What is this thing? Well, it's going to be a string, of course, because I'm passing strings along. So string, font size. But of course, I don't declare it that way in TypeScript. It has to come at the end. So font size of type string, right? And then I'm going to define what it is. It's going to be a constant, right? Now I don't have constants in TypeScript, but I'm going to use it just like this. And I'm going to use it like where I say something like this. My font size is 40 pixels. Okay? Now it says something here. It says declaration statement or statement expected, right? Well, I need a var, right? Because in JavaScript, TypeScript, I need some kind of declaration that tells me it's a variable, right? If I go const, and by the way, I can try doing this. My challenge when I use const with this is that, yes, I'm declaring it as a constant. The problem is it's not 100% compatible still with all browsers. That's why I recommend you just go with var for now. And we use it as a constant. Okay, cool. Next thing. I'll do the same thing. Var, so that's font size, and I'll say font family, right? Font family, and it'll be a string, and my default font family for me is going to be Consolas. Right? You can use whatever you like, right? Export var. The next one is going to be font color, right? Because my font color is going to have to also be a string. And what's the hexadecimal value for yellow? Anybody remember that? What that is? Yellow. I want to make a yellow font.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So I don't want to say that all the time. You could probably use the word yellow too, but I don't recommend it. I recommend you use hexadecimal values all the time with Create.js. So there's a couple of things I need there. And you know what? I've been using a lot of other little things for a long time here that I probably want to add in here as well. I'm going to put a couple spaces in here. I'm going to say export var. And you know what? The other thing I know is my screen size, or if you want to say stage size, whatever you want to call it. Let's call it screen width. My screen width is an integer, a number, and it's going to be 640 pixels. Right, so I don't have to name it here. Export, because I can change as well. My screen height is also going to be a number which I can access. We can add to this file, by the way. It's going to be 480 pixels, right? So that's two things I have: screen width, screen height. If I want to know my middle width and middle height, instead of calculating, I might as well do it here too. So I can do something like this. So export var screen, and I can say center, screen center width, right? And the width center, right? What would that be? Well, that would be just half of the 640, right? So that's equal to 640. But if I type 320 in here, that's cool, but it's a calculation. I want to calculate it, so I want to say, well, it's equal to my, I'm in the same file, I can do this, screen width, right, times 0.5. I only do this one time, oops, 0.5, because then that way it kind of calculates that. And I want to do the same thing for screen center height, because then I have that calculation, which I can always use later on. And like I said, we're going to use a bunch of other ones in here that we're going to add to our little constants file is what we're making, right? Okay, so a couple things, right? Screen width, screen height, and half the width and half the height. you know, that kind of thing. We also, if I want to know how to calculate other things, I can put those things in here as well. Any other calculations I want to try and do, like for example, you know, player lives might be something that I want to kind of put in here, because I know that, you know, maybe my player lives, right, is also a number that I want to kind of maybe play with. I'm going to start that off at 5 for now, right? And, you know, is there anything else you can think about? Well, yeah, there is. There's another game kind of constant I can put in there. There's cloud num, right? My cloud number right now is equal to 3. This is also an enemy number. You can use this in your own game to whatever you want. But I don't want to hard code these things anymore like I've been doing. So I've got a bunch of like these little constants that I'm using. Okay, cool. I got to do the same thing because now this is a module, and I want my module to be available to me. So I need to go back into index.html. Save this thing, by the way. I'm going to go back into my Solution Explorer, and I'm going to drag and drop my constants. Now this constants has got to be available before my game object exists, because I want it to be available before. I'm going to do some refactoring today. So let's do that and pull in my constants file. So here it is, before my game object. There it is. Why? Because I'm going to use these constants on a regular basis. Okay, I save my file, go back to my game, and again, it's the same thing. It's got to come before my game object and after my libraries as a reference object. Right, so I'm going to go back to Solution Explorer, pull my constants in to here, and now I have access to my constants. Okay, cool. Well, that means that I can go through here. Let's do some refactoring really quickly. And I know I'm talking fast, but we have a little time left. You know, as an example, I can go through here and see if there's any opportunities where I use the numbers 320, 240. Like for example, this here, var cloud is equal to 3, right? I shouldn't do that. I should go cloud num, right? So how do I do that? Well, it's constants, right, dot cloud num, right? It just kind of goes in there. It's better, right, isn't it? To use a constant like that I can change in one place that'll affect 4 or 5 places. Right now I got to do this one time, refactoring, and then I'm done. Okay, here's another one. Here's cloud num again, right? So it's going to affect this one too. So constants dot cloud num. Okay, cool, right? I put that in there. So my cloud num and my cloud num. That's my first use of constants that I'm doing, right? I also want to use it in my objects, right? So if I go to my Solution Explorer again and I start picking through my objects, I got a few of them. Let's go into my cloud object. Okay, I'm going to kind of make this a little bigger. And if you notice, I'm using this math.floor random is 640. Well, that's not cool. It should be the size of my screen. So I'll say constants, right? And of course, I'm going to say the size of my screen. So screen width, not center screen, but screen width would be the one I want to use. Right? By the way, you can do this in other ways as well. I like using constants for this kind of thing. Okay, so screen width is there because then one day maybe I want to change this up. Well, there's screen height right here, right? So I'm going to say constants. This is my cloud, right? Screen height, because screen height is 480 today. Tomorrow I'm going to put it on mobile. Might be something else, right? Or if I want to use some kind of retina or something that I'm expanding to. Okay, cool. I've got that one. Let's continue. Let's go through my game objects to make sure that's not corrupt somehow. This with game get bounds. There's nothing in here that I can see that's going to affect this. So my game object is safe. I'm going to kind of close these down as I go. My button is safe. I don't need anything there, so I'm going to close that off. My game is still good. I'm going to keep my constants open for a second. I might have to add something in there in a few minutes, so I'm going to keep that open. Let's go to my island. My island, oh, there's 640 again, so that's another one. So constants dot screen width, and I'm going to do the same thing here. Constants dot screen height, right? Because that's important. Yeah. Okay, so those two things are done. So screen width and screen height. And did I mess that up? Let's go back. Let's go back into the cloud for a second. That's good. I didn't mess it up. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the other ones really quickly. So my ocean, do I got to do anything in there? Not really, but it does say 960, which is like my screen height times 3, right? That's how much it would be. So if I ever wanted to start it off, you know, this might be an area where instead of hard coding it here, I could put screen height, which is 480, right? 480 and 480 times 2, sorry, times 2. So that's what this would be. So I would do some screen height, so constants dot screen height, right? And then multiply that by 2, because that's really what it is. And it's only, I mean, it's going to calculate this twice. You know what? I don't like this calculation. This is where I put it in my constants. Look. So I was going to put in something like, you know, my player lives, my screen width, my screen height, and I would say something like, you know, ocean reset. I'll call it something like that. Var, it's a special one. I would say ocean reset height, right? And the number would be, because I don't want to calculate this every time, is 960, right? Makes sense? That's why I kept my constants open. Go back to ocean, and inside there, replace that with ocean reset height instead of the calculation, because that's what I had in there before, right? See where I'm going with this? It's a little easier, a little cleaner, right? It makes more sense too, because maybe my ocean reset isn't going to be 960 if I have a different size screen. It might be something else. And again, I got to be careful because my ocean size is a certain size right now, so it works with that number, but it is what it is. Okay, so let's go back to this. I'm going to go with the last one, which is plane. Check plane out. I use 430, but that's just a hard set value where my plane hovers at. I don't think there's anything to change here because everything else doesn't use. It's all kind of relative. So I think we're good to go. Okay, we made some changes. What am I going to do? Test them out, because otherwise I'm going to be in trouble, right? So I'm going to run this thing the way it is, and hopefully it won't have any issues, you know, as opposed to the way we did things before. Let's try it out. Cool, cool, right? My reset, everything works properly. And I had to refresh, if you notice, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't give me that capability. So these are all good things. Let me also check one more thing. I like checking the JavaScript console just to make sure there's no issues on the JavaScript console here, so I know I'm good to go. All right, cool, cool. I'm going to stop. I'm going to go to Solution Explorer or Team Explorer. I'm going to go to Home. I'm going to go to Changes, and I'm going to add in, these are all the things I did, right? A lot of changes here. And I also have a few untracked files. I want to make sure that you guys get all this stuff. I added a button, button class, and constants file. Here we go. Home, and I'm going to go down sync commits and sync, and now you have all my changes. Okay, cool. So now we're up to date with those kind of things, right? So constants, I have my score. Sorry, I don't have my score yet. I have my button. And you know what else I need to prepare myself here for what I'm doing? I need a label, right? We talked about this. So let's make a label class as well. So I'm going to go into Solution Explorer. I'm going to right-click on the objects. I'm going to add. I'm going to go to TypeScript file, and I'm going to call this label, right? Because I don't have a label class. I'm going to scale this up a little bit for you guys to see. I'm going to say module, and it's going to be called objects, of course. That's what it's going to be. Same in the same module that I've been using so far. And inside my objects module, I'm going to export my label class. So it's going to be export label, or class label, right? Now my label class, I can't extend my label class because my label class is going to be of type create.js text. Well, actually I could. Extends, right? Create.js.text. It's going to be kind of a text label, but it's going to be pre-built with my fonts and my font size. Kind of pre-built, right? That makes sense to me. So instead of me having to put that all in there, it's already done for you. Okay, so that's cool. And I'm going to do one of these. And then inside there, this is going to be my label class. Label class. And inside there, I've got to have a constructor. For now, it's going to be the empty constructor. And inside the constructor, I've got to pass things to the superclass. Well, what do I need to pass things to a superclass? For my create.js text, I need a few things. I need the actual text string itself. So whatever my text string is, right? So I'm going to call this label string. I got to pass there. I also got to. I don't have that yet. I also got to pass in my font, and my font is made up of two parts: constants.font size, constants.font family, right? So I'm going to add those two together, right, to create that. So it's going to be constants.font size, right, plus, I need a bit of a break, plus constants.font family, right? That's the other thing that gets added in there, right? And that's my second thing. And on my color is constants, right, dot font color, which makes sense, right? So that's my whole thing. Now I don't have any of these things. I don't have my label string. I'm going to get my label string and the coordinates of where I'm going to put my my font through my constructor. So the first thing I'm going to take in is a label string, which is of type string, right? That's the first thing I'm going to get. And then I'm also going to get my x and y coordinates, right? So I'm going to x, which is a number, right? And y, which is also a number. That's how I roll this thing out. That's my first part of my class. Okay, cool. I'm going to save this thing. And I also need to, when I get my x and y coordinates in, this is where I'm going to set up my x and y. Now, when I'm making this font class or this label class, these labels, I have to think about how I'm going to use this thing. Am I going to use these labels for my scoreboard? Chances are not. Because why? My scoreboard, it's going to be on the top portion of my screen. I'm going to use this label class to center screen. I want these things to go center screen, so I don't have to think about center screen. I just use my label class, and everything I put goes in my center for my mail pilot, my game over, my score, all that stuff is going to be done automatically, right? So I could choose to do this or not, but I'm going to set my registration values and all that stuff first. So the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is say this dot x, because a font, this is now a text object, right, is equal to the x that I get in from my constructor. This dot y is equal to y. These are good things. But x and y is going to be based on the registration values on being on the top left corner of my font. I may not want that because it will offset the font. I don't want that. So, which means that up here, I got to have a width and a height, right? Which is probably what I want to cover inside my class as instance variables. So there, I have my instance variables, and I also have my constructor, which I haven't created yet. I haven't created my instance variables yet. And my instance variables, I'm going to put in a couple of them: width, right, which is a number, and height, which is also a number. And you know what? Do I ever need to access my width and my height outside of my my properties? Well, maybe. And by the way, there is a width and a height for my text because it comes with it. I'm going to override this when I create instance variables that match up with the instance variables that belong to the superclass. I override them, right? And I'm going to make them, of course, public because I may need to access this stuff outside of my class at some point. Okay, cool. So that's the first thing. So now if I know my width and height, I can say this dot width, right? I can calculate it as equals to this dot get measured width. This is an actual class for calculating font width, right? Get measured width, right? And I'm gonna. That's the first thing I'm gonna do. So that's my first thing, right? And this dot height, right, is now this dot get measured height. Now my height and width is going to be based on the string that I'm using and the font size and family. So I've set it here, and that's why I calculated here. You can't do this before I do this. Otherwise, these will be undefined, right? Okay, so that's the first thing I got to do. And the second thing I got to do after I do this, right, is I've got to calculate my registration values. And they've got to be, of course, half my width and half my height. So I need to calculate my width and height, and then I calculate my registration values. So I go this dot regex, right, is equal to this dot width, right, multiplied by 0.5, and this dot reg-y, oops, is equal to this dot height, multiply that by 0.5. So that tells me the center, the exact center, approximate center of my font that I'm actually rendering on the screen. So now I can, wherever I put it, it's going to go start from the center and calculate out where it's going to be. Now this is great if I know I'm going to put it in the center. This is not great if I'm going to position it on the top left or top right. That's why I wouldn't use my label class for my score. I just can't. Unless I make some kind of other class or take some of these options away. Or rejig my label. I might give it other options like other public properties that allow me to remeasure or rejig or redo whatever. But it doesn't make any sense. So that's the first thing. Then I put this dot x and this dot y in here. And of course, I'm not going to add this label onto the game. It's going to be added when I create my label object. Whew. Okay, cool. So this is one. This my label class is done. So that way I don't have to keep on doing the same thing over and over again later on. Okay. Now, of course, I created a new module, which means I'm going to go back over here. And first of all, I got to look at my index. And my label is going to be lower down, like where my button is, because I don't think it's as important as everything else. So my label is going to kind of come into my button, just above my button, let's say, or around my button. Doesn't matter if they're around, right? And of course, I've got to also add that into my game. So I've got my button, make some space for my label, right? And now my label and my button modules are added to my path. FYI, if you're doing something like Node.js or AngularJS and you want to use modules, you can still use the TypeScript way of doing modules. You don't have to use the built-in require.js with your common.js module that's built into Angular to do it. And sometimes it's better doing it this way, because these modules, they create a closure for the module automatically, where the ones that they use in AngularJS do not do it automatically. So a closure, again, is a safer way of compartmentalizing your code. Okay, cool. We've added a label and a button. I definitely want to test out my label really quickly, and I'm just going to put a label in the middle of my screen above everything else. It's going to be after I put my clouds and add it to the stage. So I'm going to create a new label locally here, var, my label, I'm going to check this out here to make sure it works, is equal to, oh, by the way, it's of type objects dot label, here it is equal to a new objects dot label, right? And of course, into the constructor, I got to pass in my label string, which is male pilot, right? Let's just put that in there with a width. X and Y numbers are the X and Y coordinates. Where do I want to put them? Well, I want to use my constants, right? Oops, I'll be okay. Male pilot constants dot screen center width, right? So I've already kind of set that up, and constants dot screen center height, right? So it's going to be in the center of my screen. And then I want to take my label and add it to the game class, right? So I'm going to say game.addChild my label, right? Just to see that it works. That's all I'm doing here. Trying to check my label. I'm going to erase this in a second after I know it works. So let's try this out. If everything goes well, I should see male pilot in the middle of my screen, right? And it goes above the clouds and everything else. See? Nice and easy. So it's rendered above my screen. Now, this makes no sense for my game, but I'm putting it there so I can see that my label, my text label, is working with one little line, as opposed to like 4 or 5 lines you got to put in every single time. Imagine that. All those lines I put into my class, I would have to use over and over and over again when I make my label. That's just stupid, right? So it's easier for me to do a class and then add to it, modify it. All right, so I got my label. I don't need this thing anymore, and I'm going to go back down to the bottom of my game, right? And I'm going to get rid of it because I don't need this in my game. I'm just prepping. This is all prepping for the other levels, right? Because it'll take me longer if I do it later. Okay, cool. Well, I just made a change. I'm going to go to my Team Explorer. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go to Changes, and I'm going to say, see, there's a couple of untracked files here. I'm going to go Added Label class. Right? So this is the add that I'm doing. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go unsync commits, and of course I'm going to click sync, so you guys have that too, right? So you got my button class and my label class. It makes sense that I have these things. They're all working. They're all good. And now, finally, we can get to the subject of creating a scoreboard. Okay, what the hell is a scoreboard anyway? Well, it's a container for 2 things that I want: my score and the live count. How many lives I have left. That's really, in essence, what it is. Okay, again, this harkens back to me creating a module. So let's go back to objects. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to go add. I'm going to go new TypeScript file, and I'm going to call this, it's an object. I'm going to call this thing scoreboard. Right? Scoreboard. Boom. It's created. All right, let me just make this a little bigger for you guys so you can see it. I don't need my label class anymore. I don't need my constants anymore. I'm not going to add anything else in here. But I need to make a new module, right? And inside my module is going to be a new class, right? I have to name my module objects, so it's the same module I'm using. And by the way, I could have put all of these objects into a single file called, and I can name it with a single module called objects. I could have done that as well. But why? That makes no sense. Why wouldn't I compartmentalize all my classes so I can look at just the class? Otherwise, it's going to be, imagine my module, what it would be like right now. My objects was huge. It's like got everything in there, right? It's massive, so that doesn't make any sense. So now in my module objects, I'm going to export, and remember that export keyword, a class, which I'm going to call capital S Scoreboard, capital B. Right, Scoreboard, 2 words. Okay, and my Scoreboard class, of course, I'm not going to extend anything because it's going to have a couple of labels, so I can't really make it a label. It doesn't really fit anything else. I could possibly make it a container of its own if I really wanted to. Some people have talked to me in the past about, hey, why don't you make this a container class and then add stuff to the container, the Scoreboard container. Yes, I could certainly do that, and then I can wipe out the container and do all kinds of stuff. That is definitely something you may want to think about. I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to make it a regular class. And inside here, I'm going to add in a constructor. Right now it's the empty constructor. We're going to add some stuff in there afterwards. I'm also going to kind of do some basic labeling here. So here's my commenting. I recommend you do this right when you start creating your classes, so that way you get into the habit of doing your commenting as you go, right? As opposed to doing it after. Doing it after is a pain in the ass, right? I mean, we may need to do some of this stuff afterwards anyway, but it helps us if we have it all done. Okay, so my constructor, let me think about how this Scoreboard would work. I want to instantiate 2 labels. Okay, cool. I have a label class, right? But my labels have a registration mark in the middle, right? I don't want my registration point to be in the middle. I want my registration point to be in the top left corner. So if I'm going to use the label class, right? If I'm going to use a label class, before I set my X and Y coordinates, I'm going to have to reset them because I can use it, but I'm going to do extra work. So it's almost not worth using because I'm going to do all kinds of resets. So I might as well not use them. So I need two labels or 2 values in my class. The first one is lives, right? So it's going to be a public value. It's going to be called lives, and it's going to be a number, right? And I'm going to start off lives as a default value of constants dot player lives, right? Makes sense. Now it's so I don't have to change that value here. I can just change it in my constants file, and it'll change everywhere. Okay, that's number 1. Second thing is I'm going to do public. I'm going to do things like score, and my number starting off from my score is going to be obviously 0. So whenever I instantiate my Scoreboard, bam, my score is 0 again. Okay? Now, this I may want to redo later on. I may want to think about not doing this if I'm going to try again and continue my score. If I have a continue option as opposed to a try again option. But for now, let's leave it as is. This is what I would do. All right? So I've got my lives and my score. I also need a lives label, so I'm going to put it between here. I'm going to say it's now the lives label, here's the question for you. Do I need access to it outside of my class? Chances are not. So make that private. So let's make these separate down here. So these are my public instance variables. Again, I'm shortcutting here. Public instance variables. Could you make these getters and setters? Absolutely, and probably you should. I'm not going to do that right now because we ain't got time. Right? And down here, these are private instance variables. I kind of separate these. And my private instance variables, I'm going to have 2. My labels is what they're going to be, right? So I'm going to have my lives label, which is of type createjs.text, right? And I'm going to have my score label, right, which is of type createjs.text. That's why, again, from an extension perspective, yes, you could make it a container. But that's the most you can do. Tag request. The other thing is I want to add in an underscore because that's my default best practice for making anything private. Okay, so lives label and score label, they're there. I have which I'm going to call it my constructor. I've got my lives and my score. Hey, I'm pretty good to go so far, right? Because I've got some of these things going on. Okay, cool. inside my constructor now, I've got to set up this stuff, right? So again, you might think that maybe I shouldn't set up constants like this and like this up here, but I should do it rather in my constructor when I create my scoreboard. Maybe. So what do I want to do in my constructor? Well, I want to create my lives labels and my score labels. That's definitely what I want to do for the first time. So I'm going to instantiate these things. So here I'm going to do, let's do my lives label first, just like in order. So I'm going to say this dot underscore lives label, right, is equal to new create.js dot text. And again, my text string I'm going to put in as a default. I'm just going to put in a stub right now. It's going to be called lives, right, capital, and a space, and then from there, my font, oh, this I can do no problem. It's going to be the same kind of idea, constants, right, dot font size, right, plus that whole pattern, constants, that's why I have my constants, dot font family. By that way, that might change at some point in the future, right? And then, of course, my font color, which is constants dot font color. Right, so that's my everything I need in a nutshell. Right now, but one thing I do need is where my label is going to start. My lives label is really going to start in the top left corner of my screen. So at 0, 0. I don't really need to put my x and y coordinates. I don't need to, right? But here's where we get a little crazy. Yes. I could, but the problem is I put registration points at different points, and I do measuring and all this kind of stuff that I don't need to do here. That's why it makes no sense. It's one line, right? I'm not saving anything. So this is one thing. I got this. Now, the question I have to you is this. Should I add this to the game? And I recommend that you do in this particular case because it's a self-contained object, right? Now, again, you might say, if this is true, right, if we had an object, I'm adding these things in. If I made this thing an object, a scoreboard object, like a container, then I would say this.addChild, blah, blah, blah. And then I would add the scoreboard later on, right? And that's where people have these different ideas, whether or not I should. It can become quite complicated, and I want to keep it simple for today, so no. All right, so this score label will be similar to this one. I'm just going to copy and paste all of this, because why am I going to do anything different than this, except for instead of lives, it's going to say score. That's the one thing. And also, I'm also going to have to put in an x or an x coordinate, right? So I'm going to say this dot score label dot x. It's got to be somewhere because I need some space on the right hand side. I'm picturing my label going to appear on the right hand side here when I start playing my game. It's going to be kind of on the right, and the label is going to be pushed off. I have 640 pixels to work with. I'm probably going to try putting it around 350 for now. If it's too much, I'll push it back to 300. So I'll say 350, right? That's a hard-coded value, you might say, right? So in the future, maybe what I'd want to do is try and figure out the percentage that I need from, how much room I have, and then make that a percentage of my screen width if I'm going to go mobile, right? For now, let's leave it alone. We'll think about this later on, what we can do with this thing. I also want to add these things to game, right? So I'm going to say this dot game, or just game. Game is a global variable. Game dot add child this underscore lives label, right? So I'm adding it in, right? And I also want to do the same thing with this one. This dot game dot add child this dot underscore score label. So I've got my score label and my lives label. Right? These are the two things I need. Now there's no update. The only way I can update, I need an update function, and it would have to be keeping track of score every frame, right? Which means I need an update function. So here's my update function. On update, what am I going to do? Well, I've got to change my my lives label and my score label. I got to make those equal to the text of those things equal to my lives and my score. Right? So how am I going to do that? It's going to be like this. This dot underscore lives label dot text, right, is equal to, and here's where it gets a little funky, right? I still got to put lives in there, right? Plus my score, this dot underscore score, because I'm doing, oh sorry, is it lives? I'm looking at lives, sorry, lives, right? And I might want to think about converting this to string, right? Because you know what? Right now, from a measuring perspective, lives is actually a number. And yes, I can add it in because JavaScript allows me to do that, but from a measuring perspective, it messes you up sometimes. Okay, that's the first thing. And then this dot, I'll do the same thing. This dot underscore score label dot text, right? So you have the text property is what I'm accessing. And it's the same kind of idea, right? So I'm going to copy all this. It's almost identical, actually. And it's score, and then this dot score dot toString, right? So that's what it's going to do. It's going to update every update. It's going to kind of change these values all the time. So I need to run a scoreboard dot update when I want to update my score. Okay, very basic class. I've got my object. Again, I could add this in as a container class, but I will leave it the way it is. Okay, cool. Now that I've got my scoreboard class, let's kind of come across here. I've got to add this into my my game, and I've got to add this into my index, right? So here's my index.html. Go to my Solution Explorer. I go to my scoreboard class. Now here's a question. I need lives and label. I may need to have a knowledge of plain, island, cloud, and ocean, and I might need a label and button later on. So maybe I'll add that in last, because I need to have all knowledge of all those things. Right? Here's my scoreboard. And I've added it there. Now I got to do the same thing with my my main class here. I'm going to add the scoreboard on here in the bottom. Okay, cool. Now I've got to create a scoreboard object here locally, right? As just like I did plain island, clouds, and ocean, I'm going to create a scoreboard object in the bottom. So var scoreboard lowercase, everything's lowercase, is equal to objects dot scoreboard uppercase, right? So I made a reference to the scoreboard, and then all the way down here, I've got to update my scoreboard, but I probably want to update it after my collision checks happen, right? So if I collide, I want to update my scoreboard, but before my stage updates, right? So I'm going to kind of do my scoreboard here. So scoreboard.update. Okay, now I haven't instantiated my scoreboard yet, so I got to do that over here. And I'm going to do that after I print out my clouds, because I want my scoreboard to hover above my clouds and above everything else. So it's got to be right at the bottom here. So I'm going to go scoreboard is equal to new objects dot scoreboard, right? And now right when I do that, it adds it to the game. I don't have to do game.addChild, because once I do that, it adds it to game right away. I can't add my scoreboard to the game because my scoreboard itself has two components, score and lives. It's not a text file, right? Now, theoretically, this is what I could have done as a difference, just to let you know. Instead of doing it this way, I could have made my scoreboard extend the text, createjs.text, and make it so that my scoreboard is one big string that crosses the entire size of my screen. So I have, instead of breaking it up in terms of lives and score, I could have done this as the whole thing, right? And then I could have made it one text file that's really long, right? One string. But I found in the past, when you do that, you don't know what size of your screen you're going to be, and there's a lot of more adjustments than having these individual piece parts that I can play with. So that's why I didn't do it this time. There's some simplicity the other way, though, so I'm just mentioning it. Okay, cool. Let's try this out before I saved. I know I've made these new changes. I haven't done any calculations with my scoreboard, but I should be able to see my score in the right place. Now, let me ask you this question. 350, is this about right? Here's my score, right? Do you think that I have enough room to have some score over here? I would say so. So I think this is probably around right, 350, right? Now lives, it's pretty butted up here against the left, but I'm okay with it being so close. It's definitely starting off at the top left corner of the screen, and there's a bit of margin on the top here that I'm getting automatically, right? And again, the reason why I'm getting that is because my top left corner, 00, is my registration mark, right, for my text, okay? Okay, cool. Now that I've added that in, I'm not quite finished yet. Do some calculations. In my collider class, here's my check collision class, right? I need to say that if I'm colliding with my cloud, right, as an example, then I lose a life. And when I'm colliding with my island, I gain some score. Oh, I don't know what this collider object is right now, right? Because, let me go back to Team Explorer, to my Solution Explorer. Let's take a look at Cloud, right? Cloud tells us a couple things. I have my string that's called Cloud. That's what goes in here, right? And that's what would be a good identifier for what I'm sending off, right? That's what I'm getting, Cloud. But you know what? I need something else in each of these objects to tell me what my name of the object is. Somehow an identifier of some sort. Now there's a bunch of different ways I can do this, right? I could put something in each of these classes, but then when I start saying in each of my objects, then I think super object, my game object. That's where I need to put things. Because if I put it there, it cascades down to the other objects that have inherited from it. Right? So let's do that. So I'm going to go back to my Solution Explorer. I'm going to go back to my big game object here that I got going on. And I've got height, width, is colliding, my sound string. Hey, what about my name string or a name? So I'm going to go public name, and it's of type string. I'm not going to initialize it here because it's going to be different for every object. Cool, cool. So now I have a name property. I know that this cloud is what I'm passing in. So here, instead of just my sound string being generated, I'm going to say for my cloud is this.name is equal to cloud. Right? It's a cheat, actually. There's other ways of doing this thing. But I found that this way is the easiest way to do it. That's why I'm telling you to do this. Now, could I come up here and go this.name is equal to cloud? Well, the problem was putting it above the superclass. You're supposed to call the a call to the superclass first before anything else. So that's why I'm doing it this way. There's a bit of duplication, but forgive me. Okay, that's one. The other thing is that if I go to my solution, and I got to do the same thing for my plane. So I got a name for my plane now. I don't need my plane yet, right? But there's nothing that's going to hurt me to say I'm going to send in my plane, right? Hey, if you notice something else, my plane is just a bitmap. I'm not making it a game object. And you might ask yourself, how come? How come, Tom? How come? Right? I could. But for now, I'm just going to say, I don't have a name property either. That's another bad thing. So I'm going to go public name, and it's going to be a type of string. And I'm going to kind of set it down here too. It's a type bitmap, but this is kind of the old prototype that I'm using. This.name is equal to plane. Okay? But it harkens to be, hey, this almost like is dying to be put into the whole object, game object, as a game object subclass, this thing here. Maybe I'll refactor some other point, not right now. Okay, cool. Maybe I'll leave it to you to refactor. Okay, that's cool. I need one more. I need a name for my island. Right, so I did my cloud, and here's my island. I'm going to say this.name is equal to island. Because now I can identify each piece. Okay, cool. Now that I've got names for these things, going back to my game class and my check collision, I can check to see if it's an island. So I have a collision. So here is, check for collision, right? Because the distance and blah, blah, whatever. If the collision happens, so here, collision has occurred, right? That's in here. Collision has occurred. And of course I'm spelling it wrong. That's why it's giving me this little hiccup. 2 R's and 2 C's. I play the sound, depending on what I'm colliding with. But I also want to say this. Collider is colliding is true. This is good. But in here I want to say something like this. If, here's another if statement. And again, there's different ways I can do it. I can put it into a switch statement. I can switch the name of the object, right? So if case of this, then it's this. Case of that, then it's that, right? Case something else, then it's something else. So let me do that with a switch in this particular case. So here's a switch. And what am I switching? Well, collider.name, right? Because I have that object now, that property for my collider, right? So if it's case, if the name is equal to island, then break. Case if the name is equal to cloud, then do something else. Right? Those are my two cases. Right? All right. Well, if it's an island, what do I want to do? I want to say my scoreboard, right? Dot score, right? Is plus equals to 100, let's say. Right? And if it's a case of a cloud, my scoreboard dot lives, right, is minus minus. Okay? Does that make sense? Let's check that and see if it works. So I'm going to run this thing and refresh just to make sure that it works. So, bam, I lost my lives. Let's see if I can get some points. I got some points. Right now my score is working. Right? 200, 300. Let's lose a couple more lives. How about when I go to 0? Oh, I should be dead now. Right? I'm -1. Okay, so this is all working. This is good. My scoreboard is working. I know it works. Hey, this is a great time to update to GitHub. Now I'm doing more GitHub stuff today because I want to show you this is the way. This is my workflow. If I was working on a game, every major change I just made an addition. I added my scoreboard. It works. I've checked it. Add it to GitHub. Right? It's going to save you heartache, guys. So look at all this stuff I did. I changed all these things. Cloud, game object. I changed my island, my plane, my game. You know, and I added a couple more files, right? So I'm going to add all that in there. I'm going to say added scoreboard object. Okay, bam, go home, and I'm going to go unsync commits and sync. Okay, one more thing to do before we stop this recording. Now that I've done this stuff, right? Here in my update, I'm checking for collisions, I did my scoreboard update. Maybe it's time to check to see if my lives are 0, right, then my game is over, right? And I want to do some cleanup. Well, the update would be a perfect place to do it. And for now, I'm going to do it in this funny place right here. So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to do an if statement. If scoreboard.lives, right, is less than 1, because I don't want to do 0 because sometimes it'll slip down below 1 if I hit multiple clouds, right? All at once. If scoreboard.lives is less than 1, then what do I want to do? Well, okay, let's think about this very carefully here. I want to stop the music, right? So it won't stop if I wipe away stuff. I'll tell you this in a second. Well, here's one thing I want to do. I want to say game or stage. I want to remove my objects from my game. So I'm going to say game.remove all objects. Right? Remove all children. What this will do is it'll just take the game container and go, it'll make it empty. Now if I just did this, but my game is still added to the stage, right? I mean it's still a container that's added to my stage, but it's just wiped out. So let's check this out. So if I just do one of these, just this. I'll do one step at a time to show you. What? How come they're not gone, right? Well, because until I remove my game container from my stage, I still have interactivity, right? Even though the game is gone, the game container is not there. I can't see anything from my stage, but I still got my interactivity. I still check for positions because the positions are still being reported even though they're not physically there. So what I next need to do is do this. I got to say stage.remove child, right? Game. I need to remove my game from my child, from my stage, right? I know my game. The only thing I'm adding into my stage is my game, so I can do this with pretty good, you know, I'm happy with doing this. Okay, let's try this next part. So refresh. Hold on, I'll refresh. Bang, I hit a bunch of different things. Still colliding. What the hell? This is bad. How come it's still going? Well, even though I've done game.remove all children, right? This does get rid of everything. That's why I don't see anything. I can do this, right? But I'm still getting this collision check going on. So I got to turn off my collision check. How do I turn off my collision check? Well, I got to say that my lives are 0, right? Then I don't check for collisions anymore, right? It makes sense not to check for collisions when my lives are 0, right? So there's a couple things I can do. So if I say if my scoreboard lives is less than 1, then only if it's greater than 1, then do this. Check for clouds. Check for the collisions. But I got to do both this one and this one. It's not just clouds, it's also this collision check. So I can put it here, or I can check for my stuff and I can put it wrapping around this collision object. Which one would you do? Should I check for lives here at the check collision method? What I would wrap around this whole if statement with another if statement that says if scoreboard is greater than, or scoreboard lives is greater than 0, then do this, right? Should I wrap it here, or should I wrap it down here? Where would you do it? Huh? Here? Jean-Claude, what would you do? You do it once, right? And I'm only doing it on collision check, right? Here I'm doing it every update. Kind of similar because the collision is running in the update, but it's here. If I do it in collision, I'm checking for it twice. I'm checking for it once for the clouds. That's why I kind of go with them. Once for the clouds, and I'm going to do check again once for the island. So every time I check collision, it's going to run that check. It's going to slow things down, right? So I want to do it one time here inside my update, my game loop. So I'm going to encapsulate this stuff with an if statement and say if scoreboard.lives is greater than 0, then do all my collision checking. But, oh, here's a problem if I do it this way, where now I kind of side with you again. I don't create my clouds. I won't create my clouds because they also create the clouds right here, right? I check for my clouds won't move either, and that's an issue. Maybe this will be bad if I do this. I may affect it, may not. My clouds may not move. It won't update. Well, it's okay. Let's leave it the way it is for now. I may have to deal with this possibility later on. Okay, so I got to put an opening, kind of a brace here, and I got to choose my closed braces over here, which kind of spaces everything nicely. So basically, I'm checking to see if I have greater than 0 lives, and typically I start off with 5 lives, right? So this should work in the beginning, and then it'll stop after. Let's try it now. So refresh. I'm going to refresh this part. So bang, I have movement, I have a score, I'm good to go. I go to 0. No more collision. What about my sound? How come my sound's still working? Well, my sound has nothing to do with my game. My sound, when I activated it, when my plane got instantiated. My plane, even though I've removed all children, I haven't destroyed my plane objects. They still exist, right? So I got to shut it down. So the way I would do that is, in my, here I got game remove all children, stage remove all, I remove this stuff. Here I'm doing a cleanup. I'm going to do one of these. I'm going to say createjs.sound.stop. Now that'll stop all sounds. Just got to be careful about that. All right, so let's check this out and see if that works. It's my next piece. So no sound. Bang, 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 bang. No sounds. This is good, right? And I need to do that because I need to shut off my sounds over and over again. Okay, but now here's a question. Do I still got these objects floating around somewhere? I've removed all children, right? I've done it from both places. So I've got, nothing on the stage. I've got nothing in game, right? How about, just to be safe, instead of specifically saying remove child game, what if I did this? Stage.remove all children as well. Just in case there's other things I don't know. Say it's added things somehow to itself, right? Because that means that wipe off everything. Wipe off the game container, and now delete it. Now these game containers still exists. My stage still exists, and my plane objects and all those things still exist in memory, right? But what I'm going to do as soon as I recalibrate this thing, if I run this thing again, they're just going to be replaced with new objects. Okay, now there is one more cleanup I could do. I could create a destroy object, right, where I set all my objects that I've created, my scoreboard, my planes, my clouds, all that stuff. I could set them all to null, right? And I could do a cleanup task where I kind of clean up all these objects by destroying. I can have a destroy method that's part of each of my objects that I kind of I access when I want to destroy everything. And my destroy method would just clean up all the objects. We just destroy them all. I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to leave it alone. And it's pretty good, actually. You'll see that it doesn't slow down much for this particular game. Okay, cool. I've made a change. Let me just make one more try this one more time to make sure that now that I remove all children from the stage, that things still work, that the way they're supposed to work. Cool, cool, cool. Gone. Okay, good. And I'm ready now to do my finite state machine. But before I do that, of course, I'm going to go to my stop recording. I'm going to go to Team Explorer. I'm going to go to Home. I'm going to go to Changes. And if you notice, I've changed my game a little bit. So added end condition to game. So it's going to end the game. Right? Now, it doesn't really do anything. It doesn't end the game. It just creates an end condition. So I know when my game is over. Right? Unsync commits and sync. Okay, I want to stop there. Let's take a small break, and we'll come back and do the finite state machine.